In America, we are used to complete freedom when it comes to artistic expression and creativity. However, in Soviet Russia, this was not the case. There were rules and expectations. The music or art was expected to glorify communism and the leader. Most everyone played by the rules, afraid of what might happen if they disobeyed. But there was one man. His name was Dmitri Shostakovich. He had such a deep love for his people, the Russians, that nothing stopped him from creating music his own way. He wrote deep and powerful music that sarcastically expressed his views of Soviet oppression under Stalin. And because of his bravery, he inspired others to also stand up for what they believe in, no matter the cost. From 1941 to 1944, the Nazi Germans held siege on Shostakovich's hometown of Leningrad. During the time of the siege, Shostakovich was a volunteer fireman for Leningrad. The people were ordered to evacuate, but Shostakovich refused. He wanted to stay in his hometown, helping his fellow countrymen.
There's no question that he had a complete and devoted love of Russian people and Russian culture. Every aspect of his music exemplifies this.
The situation grew desperate with the increasing amount of air raids by the Germans. Shostakovich and his family finally evacuated. During this time, Shostakovich was writing his 7th Symphony in defiance against the German invasion. Shostakovich said, "I wrote the 7th Symphony, the Leningrad, very quickly. I couldn't not write it. War was all around. I had to be with the people. I wanted to create the image of our country at war and capture it in music. From the first days of war, I sat down at the piano and started work. I worked intensely. I wanted to write about our time, about my contemporaries who spared neither strength nor life in the name of victory over the enemy." His symphony portrayed the horrors and reality of what the town of Leningrad had experienced. People died on the street, frozen, starving. Later, he called this piece a victory of light over darkness, of humanity over barbarism.
I don't think there's any composer that I can think of whose music is as passionate and as deep as Shostakovich.
This particular piece required a large ensemble. However, many of the performers were either dead, wounded, captured, or in Stalin's work camps. This symphony was premiered during the siege on August 9, 1942. The Leningrad Orchestra gathered. They were small, only 15 of them, but the performance was powerful. The audience was hungry, dressed in rags, gas masks in front of their faces. The performance was even more than just music. It was also a memorial to all the members who had died. Instruments were placed in the empty seats. Ksenia Matus, an oboist in the orchestra, said, "Shostakovich's music inspired us and brought us back to life. This day was our feast." Even America gave the symphony wide acceptance. It was the voice of the world against evil.
He probably saw in the suffering of the people during this time the power of the human spirit.
Music was so powerful that Stalin feared it, and Stalin is known to be one of the most feared dictators in the history.
Before Stalin's reign, there was more freedom for artists and musicians, but when Stalin came to power, he tightened his grasp over the country by controlling the music. Shostakovich was widely respected as a composer around the world. Even Stalin could not ignore his power among the Russians. In fact, Stalin most likely feared Shostakovich, but he could not be arrested like other artists who opposed Stalin, for he was loved by his people, and his people's love saved him.
So Stalin so willingly wanted to control because he saw that power and he, in a sense, almost feared it.
Shostakovich was a huge influence on some of his fellow composers. Aaron Copland, an American composer, was criticized by Senator McCarthy and the government as being a communist because of his relationship with Shostakovich. Copland mentioned how appalled he was at Stalin's treatment of Shostakovich. Copland was impressed by Shostakovich's perseverance in times of persecution, and he followed Shostakovich's example and continued to write his music. Benjamin Britten was also greatly influenced by Shostakovich. During World War II, he wrote a war requiem that depicted the futility of war. Shostakovich encouraged these men and others to stand up for what they believe in, no matter the consequence.
Music isn't just something you listen to in the background. It isn't. It's a really powerful force to be not only evocative, but can even be a powerful force in something beyond just the artistic field.
I think it's somewhat of a love-hate relationship. I think there were times that he might have seen some shining light at the end of the tunnel of what socialism and this Soviet government was trying to do, but he also saw great tragedy and suffering and things that were insufferable during his lifetime.
Music isn't just something to throw on the radio. It can be something so much more.
Shostakovich was elected to the governing board in Leningrad of Union of Soviet Composers. With this, Shostakovich was able to gain more freedom in compositions for him and his fellow composers. Later on in Shostakovich's life, he joined the Communist Party so that he could have more say in the freedoms of musicians. With these acts, Shostakovich helped artists and musicians not be afraid of creating new works. There was more room for artistic expression and creativity. Even with the wide support, Shostakovich was still criticized. His music was controversial. It pushed the limits of the time. Stalin and the Soviets had rules, and Shostakovich just seemed to break them all. At different times, Shostakovich was forced to apologize for his music. The music was too Western, it was insulting, it was dangerous, and it weakened Stalin's power.
I believe strongly that his music will live on forever, and one of the reasons for that is that I believe that he had such conviction about what he was doing that the music sort of stands for itself.
At other times, Shostakovich received letters from strangers saying, "You ought to be executed, killed, exterminated, you scoundrel." But this did not stop him from writing his music. There were points where he would adapt and conform to the Soviet rules to save his life and those around him. But as quickly as he could, he once again pushed the boundaries and began to write with more sarcasm and active defiance against Stalin. Shostakovich said, "Even if they cut off both my hands, I'll go on writing music just the same, holding the pen between my teeth."
It's the wars that really intrigue people about history. It's where we learn the most about ourselves and what happens when things go wrong. And you've got this very visceral art form coming from it that connects us to it. And if you think about with the wars going on now, connecting, seeing maybe what if music was used as a powerful force.
Shostakovich turned history on its head. He was a hero. He created new trails in music by opening doors for artistic freedom. It was not only his music that inspired others, but his own acts of love and kindness showed a man not afraid to stand up for the truth, and brave enough to care for and help others. That is who he was and who he will remain when we look back on a man who was more powerful than even he could imagine. And as Israel Vladimirovich Nesviev put succinctly, in those years no other artist, whatever the field, could even think of protesting against Stalinistic terror through art. Only instrumental music with its own distinctive methods of expressive generalization had the power to communicate the terrible truths of that time. And this is exactly what Shostakovich did. Instead of being a voice for the government, Shostakovich turned around and used his music to be a voice for the people.